There are certain phrases that stay with you forever, words that define a moment so completely that you remember exactly where you were standing, what the room smelled like, how the light hit the windows. For me, those words were, "You don't fit the image." They were spoken to me in a windowless conference room on a Thursday afternoon, and they were meant to explain why I was being passed over for a promotion I had earned 10 times over. The person who spoke those words thought they were delivering a simple corporate truth, a reality I needed to accept about my place in the organization. They had no idea they were actually handing me the motivation that would eventually put me in charge of their salary, their career trajectory, and their future at the company. My name is Maya Patel, and I'm 36 years old. I'm currently the Senior Vice President of Human Resources and Talent Development at Hartwell Corporation, a Fortune 500 technology company with over 15,000 employees worldwide. In my role, I oversee all compensation decisions, all promotion approvals, all hiring strategies. Every salary increase, every executive appointment, every significant personnel decision crosses my desk. But 7 years ago, I was a mid-level HR manager being told that I would never advance further because I didn't look the part. Let me take you back to where it all began, because you need to understand the journey to appreciate the destination. I joined Hartwell Corporation 9 years ago as an HR analyst. I had a master's degree in human resource management and 3 years of experience at a smaller company. Hartwell was a step up, a chance to work for a major corporation with sophisticated HR systems and significant resources. I was excited about the opportunity and determined to prove myself. Hartwell had a very specific culture. It was founded 40 years ago by James Hartwell, a charismatic engineer who built the company through force of personality and relentless drive. Even though James had retired 5 years before I joined, his influence permeated everything. The company valued a particular type of person: confident, assertive, polished, ambitious in ways that were obvious and loud. The executives all looked and acted a certain way: expensive suits, firm handshakes, commanding presence, the kind of people who dominated rooms just by walking into them. I was not that type of person. I'm 5'3", soft-spoken, more comfortable listening than talking. I'm thoughtful rather than decisive in the moment. I process information carefully before offering opinions. I build consensus rather than making pronouncements. My leadership style is collaborative and empathetic rather than authoritative and commanding. And perhaps most relevantly, I'm a woman of color in a company whose senior leadership was, at that time, almost entirely white men. But I was good at my job. Really good. I understood HR systems deeply. I could analyze workforce data and identify patterns that others missed. I could mediate conflicts and find solutions that satisfied all parties. I could design compensation structures that were both fair and cost-effective. I could develop training programs that actually changed behavior rather than just checking compliance boxes. Within 2 years, I was promoted to senior HR analyst. Within 4 years, I was promoted to HR manager, overseeing a team of 5 people responsible for talent management and organizational development. I received excellent performance reviews. My projects consistently delivered results. My team was engaged and productive. I was on a clear upward trajectory. Or so I thought. The HR department at Hartwell was led by a woman named Virginia Caldwell. Virginia was in her late 50s, a veteran of corporate HR who had been with Hartwell for 20 years. She embodied the Hartwell image perfectly: tall, authoritative, impeccably dressed, with a commanding presence that filled every room she entered. She had the respect of the executive team, particularly the CEO, Richard Morrison, who had been personally recruited by James Hartwell himself and who carried on the founder's traditions and values. Virginia managed the HR department with a clear hierarchy and strict protocols. She made all significant decisions herself, delegating only execution to her managers. She valued loyalty and conformity to established practices. She had very specific ideas about what HR professionals should look like and how they should behave. For the first few years, my relationship with Virginia was professional and cordial. She appreciated my analytical skills and my ability to execute projects efficiently. But as I became more senior and started having my own ideas about how HR should operate, tensions began to emerge. The breaking point came around a major initiative I had been developing for about 6 months. Hartwell was struggling with retention, particularly among younger employees. Our turnover rate for employees under 30 was approaching 30% annually, which was costing the company millions in recruitment and training costs. I conducted extensive analysis of the problem. I surveyed departing employees. I analyzed compensation data. I studied industry trends. What I found was that Hartwell's approach to talent management was outdated. We focused heavily on hierarchy and traditional career paths, but younger employees valued flexibility, learning opportunities, and meaningful work over titles and corner offices. Our compensation structure rewarded tenure over performance. Our promotion criteria emphasized conformity to company culture over actual results. I developed a comprehensive proposal for modernizing our talent management approach. It included flexible work arrangements, competency-based advancement rather than time-based promotion, enhanced learning and development opportunities, and a revised compensation philosophy that rewarded impact rather than just longevity. The proposal was detailed, data-driven, and projected to reduce turnover by at least 10 percentage points while actually decreasing overall compensation costs through improved efficiency. I was proud of this work. It represented months of research and analysis. More importantly, it addressed a real problem that was hurting the company. I believed it could transform how Hartwell attracted, developed, and retained talent. I presented the proposal to Virginia in a private meeting, walking her through the data and recommendations. She listened with an expression that grew increasingly skeptical. When I finished, there was a long silence. "Maya, this is very thorough work," she began, in a tone that made clear a but was coming. "But it's also fundamentally misaligned with Hartwell's culture and values. We've built this company on certain principles: respect for hierarchy, loyalty, paying your dues, working your way up through the ranks. What you're proposing would undermine all of that. With respect, Virginia, I'm proposing we adapt those principles to current workforce realities," I said carefully. "The data shows that younger employees don't respond to traditional approaches the way previous generations did. If we don't evolve, we'll keep losing our best young talent to competitors. Or maybe we'll filter out people who don't fit our culture and retain those who do," Virginia countered. "Not everyone belongs at Hartwell, Maya. That's not a bad thing. It's about maintaining standards and cultural coherence." "But we're losing people with strong performance records," I pointed out. "We're not just filtering out poor fits. We're losing talented people who could contribute significantly if we gave them the right environment." Virginia's expression hardened. "Maya, I think you're projecting your own preferences onto this analysis. You value flexibility and non-traditional approaches because that fits your personal style. But Hartwell has succeeded for 40 years with a different approach. I'm not interested in throwing that away based on survey data from 20-somethings who've been here less than 2 years." The dismissal stung, but I tried once more. "I understand the concern about changing core values. But I'm not proposing we abandon what makes Hartwell successful. I'm proposing we adapt our practices to remain successful in a changing environment. The business case is strong." "The business case is based on assumptions I don't share," Virginia said firmly. "I'm not going to bring this to the executive team. It's not the direction I want the HR department to go." That was the end of the discussion. My proposal was rejected without ever being seen by anyone else. Months of work dismissed in a 15-minute meeting. I was frustrated and disappointed, but I told myself this was just one setback. I would have other opportunities. Then, 3 months later, the director of HR position opened up. This was the role directly under Virginia, overseeing all HR managers and serving as the strategic partner to the executive team. It was the natural next step in my career progression. I had been an HR manager for 2 years, had consistently received excellent reviews, and had the expertise to handle the expanded responsibilities. I applied for the position, feeling confident about my candidacy. I had a strong track record, deep knowledge of the company, and clear ideas about how to make the HR function more strategic and effective. Several colleagues encouraged me to apply, telling me I was the obvious choice. The interview process was extensive. A panel interview with Virginia and 2 other senior HR leaders, a presentation to the executive team about my vision for HR, and individual meetings with several executives. I prepared thoroughly, developing a compelling narrative about how HR could be a true business partner rather than just an administrative function. The presentation to the executive team went well, I thought. I talked about using workforce analytics to drive better business decisions, about building leadership capabilities to support growth, about creating a talent pipeline that would sustain the company's success. The executives asked thoughtful questions and seemed engaged. But in my individual meetings with executives, I started noticing a pattern. They would ask about my experience, my qualifications, my accomplishments. Then they would ask questions that seemed designed to assess something else. How I would handle pushback from strong-willed leaders, whether I could command respect from senior executives, if I had the presence to represent HR at the highest levels of the company. One executive, the CFO Gerald Thompson, was particularly direct. Maya, you have strong analytical skills and you clearly know HR. But this director role requires someone who can hold their own with the executive team, who can push back when necessary, who has the gravitas to be taken seriously in high-stakes discussions. Do you think you have that presence? I assured him I did, citing examples of times I had successfully influenced senior leaders. But I could see the doubt in his eyes. He was assessing me against some mental image of what an HR director should look like, and I apparently didn't match it. 2 weeks after my final interview, Virginia called me into her office. I knew before she started talking what was coming. The body language, the carefully neutral expression, the way she gestured to the chair across from her desk rather than the more casual seating area where we usually met. Maya, I want to talk to you about the director position, she began. We've made a decision, and I wanted to tell you personally before the announcement goes out. I didn't get it, I said quietly. We've decided to offer the position to Carson Matthews, Virginia confirmed. Carson was an HR manager from our West Coast office, someone I knew slightly but had never worked with directly. He has strong credentials and brings a different perspective that we think will be valuable. Can you tell me why I wasn't selected? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I'd like to understand what I need to develop for future opportunities. Virginia hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. This was the moment that would define everything that came after. Maya, you're a very competent HR professional, she began carefully. Your analytical work is excellent. You execute projects well. Your team respects you. But for a director-level role, we need someone with a different presence. Someone who fits the image of what HR leadership looks like at Hartwell. Someone who can command a room and hold their own with the executive team in a way that comes naturally. What does that mean, exactly? I asked, even though I was starting to understand. It means we need someone who embodies the Hartwell culture at a senior level, Virginia said, choosing her words carefully. Someone whose leadership style aligns with how we operate as an organization. Carson has that executive presence. He has a background that resonates with our leadership team. He fits the image of what a senior HR leader should be. There it was. I don't fit the image. Not, you lack qualifications. Not, you need more experience. Not even, Carson was more qualified. Just, you don't fit the image. Virginia, I've been here 6 years. I've consistently delivered results. I have the skills and experience for this role. What you're describing sounds less like legitimate job requirements and more like bias. Virginia's expression became cold. Maya, I'm going to stop you right there. We made this decision based on legitimate business considerations about leadership presence and cultural fit. I understand you're disappointed, but questioning the integrity of our decision-making process is inappropriate and frankly concerning. I suggest you accept this outcome professionally and focus on continuing to do good work in your current role. It was a threat, barely veiled. Don't push back, don't question the decision, accept your place. The message was clear. This is as far as you're going to go here. I left that meeting feeling devastated, angry, and helpless. I had worked hard, delivered results, played by all the rules. And I was being told that none of it mattered because I didn't look the part, didn't fit some narrow definition of what leadership should look like. That evening, I sat in my apartment and seriously considered quitting. I could find another job. I had strong credentials and a solid track record. There were companies that would value my skills and not penalize me for failing to match some outdated image of executive presence. But as I thought about it more, I realized something. If I left, nothing would change at Hartwell. They would continue hiring and promoting people who fit their narrow image, continue overlooking talented people who didn't match the template, continue perpetuating the same biases that had just denied me a promotion I had earned. I decided to stay. Not because I accepted their judgment of me, but because I decided I was going to change their judgment. I was going to prove that their image of leadership was wrong, outdated, and ultimately harmful to the company. And somehow, someday, I was going to be in a position where I could ensure that no one else would be told they don't fit the image. Carson Matthews started as director of HR a month later. He was exactly what Virginia had described. Tall, confident, with an MBA from a prestigious school and a resume that included stints at 2 other Fortune 500 companies. He had polished presentation skills and an easy rapport with executives. He looked like he had been sent from central casting to play the role of corporate HR executive. He was also, I discovered quickly, not particularly good at the actual work of HR. He was great at presenting in meetings and building relationships with executives. But he didn't understand workforce analytics. He couldn't design compensation structures. He delegated all the technical work to his managers while taking credit for the results. Within 3 months, it became clear that I was doing the substantive work while Carson was providing the executive presence. This arrangement might have continued indefinitely, with me doing the work and Carson getting the recognition, except for 2 developments that changed everything. First, Hartwell acquired a smaller technology company called DataVision. The acquisition was meant to accelerate Hartwell's move into artificial intelligence and machine learning. It was a significant strategic move, and it came with major HR challenges. Integrating 2 very different cultures, retaining DataVision's key talent, managing redundancies, harmonizing compensation structures. Carson was assigned to lead the HR integration. It was a high-visibility project that could make or break his reputation. And he was completely overwhelmed by it. The complexity of the work, the multiple stakeholders, the technical details of compensation and benefits integration, the sensitivity required to manage people through uncertainty. None of it played to his strengths. 3 weeks into the integration planning, Carson called me into his office. "Maya, I need your help with the DataVision integration," he said, looking stressed. "There are a lot of moving pieces, and I could use someone with your analytical skills to develop the detailed plans." "Of course," I said, seeing an opportunity. "What specifically do you need?" "Honestly, all of it. The integration timeline, the compensation analysis, the retention strategy, the communication plan. I'll handle the executive presentations and stakeholder management, but I need you to do the substantive work." In other words, he needed me to do his job while he took credit for it. But I agreed, because I saw a chance to demonstrate my capabilities on a high-stakes project. I spent the next 2 months working essentially around the clock on the integration plan. I analyzed every aspect of both organizations' HR systems. I identified the key talent we needed to retain at DataVision and developed targeted retention packages. I designed a comprehensive communication strategy to manage employee anxiety. I created detailed integration timelines with clear milestones and accountability. Most importantly, I recognized that DataVision's culture was very different from Hartwell's. DataVision was flat, collaborative, innovative, informal. The very things that made them successful in AI development were completely opposite to Hartwell's hierarchical, formal, traditional culture. If we tried to force DataVision employees into the Hartwell mold, We would lose exactly the innovative capability we had acquired them for. I developed a proposal for a two-culture approach. Maintain Data Vision's culture as a relatively autonomous unit while integrating the necessary administrative and operational systems. It was risky, because it contradicted Hartwell's usual approach of complete cultural assimilation. But it was the right answer for this situation. I presented my analysis and recommendations to Carson. He looked at the materials with visible relief. This is excellent work, Maya. Really comprehensive. I think we're ready to present to the executive team. Actually, Carson, I think we should discuss the two-culture recommendation more before presenting, I said. It's going to be controversial. Virginia and the executive team are going to push back because it goes against how we've always done integration. You worry too much, Carson said dismissively. The analysis is solid. They'll see the logic of it. He was wrong. When we presented to the executive team the following week, the reaction to the two-culture proposal was swift and negative. Richard Morrison, the CEO, was particularly opposed. This is exactly the kind of fragmentation we're trying to avoid, he said firmly. We acquired Data Vision to bring their capabilities into Hartwell, not to create a separate fiefdom with different rules. Everyone who works here should be part of one culture, one company. Carson tried to defend the proposal, but he couldn't articulate the reasoning effectively because he hadn't done the underlying analysis. He fell back on vague statements about valuing different perspectives and maintaining innovation, but he couldn't answer specific questions about how the two-culture approach would work operationally. Virginia jumped in to support Richard's position. I think we need to stick with our proven integration approach. Cultural unity has always been one of Hartwell's strengths. We shouldn't compromise that. I watched Carson fumbling, unable to make the case persuasively. Finally, I spoke up. If I may, I think there's a misunderstanding about what we're proposing, I said carefully. We're not suggesting Data Vision operate independently. We're suggesting that for the specific functions related to AI development, we maintain some of the cultural practices that make them effective innovators, while fully integrating all other aspects of the organization. The data shows that Data Vision's best AI engineers are motivated by autonomy, collaborative problem-solving, and informal working relationships. If we force them into rigid hierarchy and formal protocols, our retention modeling suggests we'll lose 40% of key talent within 18 months. Richard looked at me with interest. You have data on that? Yes, sir. We surveyed Data Vision employees about their motivations and what they value in their work environment. We also analyzed industry data on retention challenges after tech company acquisitions. The pattern is clear. Companies that try to impose completely different cultures on acquired tech talent experience severe retention problems. But companies that find ways to preserve what makes the acquired team effective while integrating operations see much better outcomes. I walked through the specific data, the retention projections, the cost implications of losing key talent. I explained how the two-culture approach would work practically, addressing each of Richard's concerns with specific details. The room was quiet when I finished. Then Richard spoke. This is the level of analysis I was expecting. Carson, why didn't you explain it this way from the start? Carson looked uncomfortable. Maya did most of the detailed analytical work. She can speak to the specifics better than I can. It was an admission that I had done the substantive work while he had just been the front person. I saw Virginia's expression tighten, saw Richard's eyes narrow slightly. The dynamic in the room had shifted. Let me ask you something, Maya, Richard said. If you were leading this integration, how would you approach it? It was a test, and I knew it. I could demur, say that Carson was leading it and I was just supporting. Or I could be honest about what I thought needed to happen. If I were leading it, sir, I would implement the two-culture approach for the AI division while fully integrating everything else, I said. I would put retention packages in place for the top 20 Data Vision AI engineers. I would establish clear communication channels so Data Vision employees understand what's changing and what's staying the same. I would assign a dedicated integration team to manage the transition over 6 months. and I would establish metrics to track progress, particularly retention of key talent and maintenance of innovation output. How confident are you that this approach would work? Richard asked. I'm confident in the analysis, sir. The approach is based on solid data and industry best practices. There's always execution risk, but I believe this gives us the best chance of achieving the acquisition objectives. Richard looked at Virginia. Virginia, I want Maya leading the data vision integration. Carson can support her, but she should be the point person on this. Virginia looked like she had swallowed something bitter, but she nodded. Of course, Richard. Whatever you think is best. That meeting marked the beginning of a shift. I became the de facto lead on the data vision integration, working directly with the executive team while Carson was increasingly sidelined. It was exactly the reversal of our supposed roles. The integration took 6 months and was, by any measure, a significant success. We retained 95% of DataVision's key AI talent. We successfully integrated all operational systems. We maintained DataVision's innovative output while bringing them into Hartwell's strategic planning and resource allocation processes. The two-culture approach worked exactly as I had projected. Richard Morrison took notice. He started pulling me into other strategic discussions. He would ask my opinion on workforce planning, on organizational design, on talent development. He seemed to value my analytical approach and my willingness to challenge conventional thinking with data. Meanwhile, Carson was struggling. Without me doing the substantive work behind the scenes, his limitations were becoming obvious. He missed deadlines. He made commitments he couldn't deliver on. He struggled with complex projects. 6 months after the DataVision integration, he resigned to take a position at another company. Everyone knew he was leaving before he was pushed out. That created a vacancy. The director of HR position was open again. This time, I didn't apply. I waited to see what would happen. A week after Carson's resignation was announced, Virginia called me into her office. I expected her to tell me about the search process for Carson's replacement. Instead, she offered me the position directly. Maya, I think you've demonstrated that you're ready for the director role, she said, clearly uncomfortable. Your work on the DataVision integration was excellent. Richard has specifically mentioned your capabilities. I'd like to offer you the promotion to Director of HR. I looked at her steadily. A year ago, you told me I didn't fit the image for this role. What's changed? Virginia's discomfort increased. I think we both understand that the company's needs have evolved. The skills required for senior HR leadership are different than what we traditionally emphasized. Your analytical capabilities and strategic thinking are exactly what we need going forward. So now I fit the image? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Maya, I'm offering you a significant promotion. I hope you'll accept it professionally without rehashing past decisions. I considered refusing, just to make a point. But that would be cutting off my nose to spite my face. I wanted this role, I had earned it, and accepting it would give me more power to change things from within. I accept the promotion, I said. But I want to be clear about something. I'm going to do this role my way, using my approach and my judgment. If you're offering me this position, it needs to be because you actually value my capabilities, not because you're hoping I'll conform to some image once I have the title. Virginia nodded stiffly. Of course. I expect you to bring your perspective to the role. I became Director of HR, and immediately began implementing changes. I launched the modernized talent management approach I had proposed 2 years earlier, the one Virginia had rejected. I revised our promotion criteria to emphasize results over tenure. I implemented flexible work policies. I redesigned our leadership development program to build capabilities rather than just executive presence. Some of these changes were controversial. Some executives pushed back. But I had Richard's support, and I had results to point to from the DataVision integration. Gradually, resistance faded as people saw the improvements in retention, engagement, and talent quality. Then, 18 months into my role as director, Virginia announced she would be retiring. She was 62, had been planning to work until 65, but decided to accelerate her timeline. Everyone understood she was being eased out, that the company wanted different HR leadership. The search for her replacement was extensive. The company hired an executive search firm and interviewed external candidates, as well as considering internal options. I was the only internal candidate, but I was up against people with more traditional backgrounds. CHROs from other Fortune 500 companies, consultants from major firms, executives with impressive credentials and polished presentations. I prepared thoroughly for each round of interviews. I developed a comprehensive vision for HR at Hartwell. I analyzed every aspect of our people systems and identified opportunities for improvement. I created a presentation about how HR could be a true driver of business value rather than just a support function. But I also did something different. I didn't try to fit anyone's image. I presented as myself, analytical, thoughtful, strategic, focused on evidence rather than rhetoric. I talked about substance rather than style. I made clear that I was offering a different kind of HR leadership than Virginia had provided, and that this difference was exactly what Hartwell needed. The final interview was with Richard and the board of directors. 20 people in a conference room, evaluating whether I was the right person to lead HR for a 15,000-person organization. I gave them my vision. HR as a strategic partner that uses data and analytics to drive better business decisions. HR as a talent developer that builds capabilities to support growth. HR as a culture architect that creates environments where diverse people can thrive. HR as a business function that delivers measurable value. Then one board member, a woman named Patricia Chen, asked the question that got to the heart of everything. Maya, you're quite different from Virginia in your approach and style. Some might say you don't fit the traditional image of a CHRO at a company like Hartwell. How do you respond to that concern? I looked directly at her. You're absolutely right that I'm different from Virginia. I'm also different from the traditional image of senior leadership at Hartwell. But I would argue that traditional image is exactly the problem we need to solve. Hartwell's leadership doesn't reflect the diversity of our workforce or our customer base. Our image of what leadership looks like has caused us to overlook talented people who don't fit a narrow template. And that's limiting our ability to compete in a changing market. I paused, then continued. You asked how I respond to concerns about not fitting the image. My response is that we need to change the image. We need to expand our definition of what leadership looks like to include different styles, different backgrounds, different approaches. Not because it's politically correct, but because it's good business. The data shows that diverse leadership teams make better decisions. Organizations with inclusive cultures attract and retain better talent. The traditional image isn't serving us well anymore. Patricia nodded thoughtfully. Another board member jumped in. That's a compelling argument for diversity generally. But specifically for you, why should we take a chance on someone whose leadership style is so different from what we're accustomed to? You shouldn't take a chance on me because of some abstract diversity argument, I said firmly. You should promote me because I've delivered results. I led the most successful acquisition integration in company history. I've reduced turnover by 8 percentage points while improving talent quality. I've redesigned our talent management systems to be more effective and more cost-efficient. I've built credibility with every executive at this company by providing analysis and recommendations that actually help them achieve their business objectives. My style might be different, but my results speak for themselves. The room was quiet. Then Richard spoke. Maya has proven herself repeatedly over the past 2 years, he said. She's demonstrated exactly the kind of strategic thinking and business partnership we need from HR. Yes, she's different from Virginia. That's not a weakness. That's an asset. Hartwell needs to evolve, and Maya represents that evolution. 2 weeks later, I was named Senior Vice President of Human Resources. At 34 years old, I became the youngest person on Hartwell's executive team, the first woman of color in the C-suite, and the first CHRO who didn't fit the traditional corporate mold. The transition wasn't entirely smooth. Some executives struggled with my style. Some missed Virginia's deferential approach and found my direct, evidence-based recommendations challenging. There were moments when I could feel people questioning whether I belonged in the role, whether I had the gravitas, whether I fit the image. But I had results. Employee engagement improved. Retention improved. We attracted better talent. Our diversity metrics improved significantly. Most importantly, business leaders started viewing HR as a strategic partner rather than an administrative function. We were helping them solve actual business problems, and they valued that. One of my first major initiatives as SVP was to completely revamp our promotion and compensation processes. I implemented transparent criteria that emphasized actual performance and potential rather than subjective assessments of presence or fit. I required structured interviews and diverse panels for all senior positions. I established clear accountability for diversity in succession planning. I made sure no one else would be told they didn't fit the image. This brought me into direct conflict with some executives who preferred the old way of doing things, where promotions were based on relationships and subjective assessments. One of those executives was Gerald Thompson, the CFO who had doubted my presence during my first interview for director. Gerald managed his finance team with traditional command and control methods. He valued people who matched his style: aggressive, competitive, willing to work extreme hours. His team had high turnover, particularly among women and people of color. But because his department delivered results, he had always had complete autonomy over his people decisions. That changed when I became SVP. I implemented new policies that required diverse candidate slates for all senior positions, structured interview processes, and documented justification for promotion and compensation decisions. Gerald resented these requirements, seeing them as bureaucratic interference in his authority. The conflict came to a head when Gerald wanted to promote one of his directors, a man named Brad Sullivan, to CFO for one of our business units. Brad was capable but had a reputation for being difficult to work with. Several high-performing women had left his teams citing hostile work environments. There had been informal complaints about discriminatory comments, though nothing had been formally documented. Under the old system, Gerald could have simply promoted Brad with minimal oversight. Under the new system, the promotion had to go through a structured review process that I oversaw. I reviewed Brad's file and conducted interviews with people who had worked with him. The pattern was clear. He was technically skilled but created toxic team environments. The informal complaints were serious and credible, even if they hadn't been formally filed. I declined to approve the promotion. Gerald was furious. He stormed into my office demanding to know why I was blocking his decision. Gerald, Brad Sullivan has a documented pattern of creating hostile work environments, I explained calmly. Multiple people have reported concerns about his treatment of team members, particularly women. Promoting him to a senior leadership role would send a terrible message and expose the company to significant risk. Those are just complaints from people who couldn't handle a demanding environment, Gerald shot back. Brad expects excellence. Some people can't deliver that, and they complain instead of performing. The people who complained were high performers who left for positions at our competitors, I countered. We didn't lose them because they couldn't handle demanding work. We lost them because they couldn't work in hostile environments. This is ridiculous, Gerald said angrily. I've managed finance for 12 years. I know what skills are needed for finance leadership. You're an HR person. You don't understand the business well enough to second-guess my judgment about my own people. I'm not second-guessing your assessment of Brad's technical skills, I said evenly. I'm sure he's financially capable. But I am responsible for ensuring our promotion decisions don't create legal risks or undermine our culture. Brad's track record suggests he would do both. I'm not approving this promotion. Gerald went directly to Richard, arguing that I was overstepping my authority and interfering with his ability to manage his organization. It was a test of my position and my authority. Richard called us both into his office to discuss the situation. Gerald made his case. Brad was the best person for the role. The complaints against him were overblown. I was letting HR concerns override business needs. Then Richard asked for my perspective. Brad Sullivan may be technically qualified, I said. But leadership is about more than technical skills. It's about building effective teams, creating environments where people can do their best work, and representing company values. Brad has failed at all of those things. Multiple women have left his teams. We've had informal complaints about discriminatory behavior. If we promote him despite this track record, we're sending a clear message about what we really value, and it's not the inclusive, respectful culture we claim to want. I paused, then continued. More than that, promoting Brad would expose us to significant legal risk. If someone files a formal discrimination complaint against him, and we've promoted him despite knowing about his track record, we've demonstrated negligence. That's not being cautious. That's being responsible. Richard looked at Gerald. She's right. We can't promote someone with this kind of track record. Find another candidate. Gerald's face went red. This is exactly what I was concerned about when Maya was promoted. She doesn't understand business realities. She's letting HR concerns override everything else. No, Gerald, Richard said firmly. She's preventing us from making a mistake that could cost the company millions in litigation and destroy our credibility about taking culture seriously. That's exactly what I need from my CHRO. This discussion is over. Find another candidate for the position. That exchange established a precedent. HR decisions, particularly about senior promotions and compensation, would not be rubber-stamped. They would be evaluated against clear criteria that included not just business results but also leadership capability and cultural fit in the positive sense, creating environments where people could thrive. Gerald never forgave me for that. But he also never challenged my authority again. And over time, as other executives saw that I was holding everyone to the same standards, that I was making decisions based on consistent principles rather than personal preferences, resistance faded. Now, 3 years into my role as SVP, I oversee all significant people decisions at Hartwell. Every promotion above a certain level crosses my desk. Every compensation decision for senior leaders requires my approval. Every succession plan must meet standards I've established. And here's what's changed since I took over. We've increased representation of women in leadership from 18% to 37%. We've increased representation of people of color in leadership from 12% to 28%. Our employee engagement scores have improved by 15 points. Our retention of high performers has improved significantly. And our business results have been excellent, proving that inclusive, thoughtful people management actually drives business value. I think often about that conversation with Virginia 7 years ago, when she told me I didn't fit the image. I think about how devastating those words were, how they made me question my worth and my future. I think about how close I came to accepting her judgment, to believing that maybe I really didn't belong in senior leadership. But I also think about what that moment taught me. It taught me that sometimes the people evaluating you are wrong. Sometimes their image of what leadership should look like is outdated, narrow, and ultimately harmful. Sometimes not fitting their image isn't a flaw in you, it's a flaw in their image. More importantly, it taught me that the best response to being told you don't fit isn't to try to fit. It's to prove that their image was wrong in the first place. It's to succeed on your own terms, in your own way, and to use that success to create opportunities for others who also don't fit the traditional mold. Virginia retired a year after I became SVP. I attended her retirement party, where speaker after speaker praised her long service and her contributions to Hartwell. No one mentioned that she had presided over a department that perpetuated bias and limited opportunity for anyone who didn't match a narrow template. Near the end of the event, Virginia approached me privately. "Maya, I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've accomplished," she said. "You've brought a new energy to HR." I looked at her steadily. "Thank you, Virginia. Though I have to say, It would have been nice if you had believed I was capable of this 7 years ago when I first applied for director. She had the grace to look uncomfortable. I made the best decisions I could with the information I had at the time. You made decisions based on image and bias rather than capability and results, I said quietly. And those decisions limited opportunities for talented people and ultimately held the company back. I hope you can at least acknowledge that now. Virginia didn't respond. She just nodded slightly and walked away. I never spoke with her again. But that exchange clarified something for me. Virginia genuinely believed she had made good decisions based on legitimate business considerations. She didn't see her judgments as biased. She saw them as upholding standards and maintaining culture. That's how bias usually works. It disguises itself as standards, as culture fit, as legitimate business needs. People who perpetuate it often don't recognize what they're doing. That's why changing systems and processes matters so much. You can't rely on people suddenly becoming less biased. You have to create structures that make bias harder to exercise, that require evidence and documentation, that force people to evaluate candidates against objective criteria rather than subjective images. Last month, I was reviewing promotion recommendations for our next cycle. One of the candidates was a young woman named Priya Sharma, an HR manager who had been with Hartwell for 4 years. Her functional leader was recommending her for promotion to director. I reviewed Priya's file carefully. Her performance reviews were excellent. Her projects had delivered strong results. Her team engagement scores were high. She had the technical capabilities and strategic thinking for the director role. But the comments from her skip-level manager gave me pause. Priya is very capable but quite reserved. She may need to develop more executive presence before she's ready for director. There it was again. The same kind of subjective assessment that had been used to deny me opportunities. The same focus on presence and image rather than results. I scheduled time to meet with Priya directly. I wanted to understand her capabilities and aspirations without the filter of others' perceptions. Priya came to my office looking nervous. Meeting with the SVP of HR is intimidating for any mid-level manager. I tried to put her at ease. Priya, I wanted to talk to you about your career development. I've been reviewing your file, and I'm impressed by your work. Tell me about your aspirations. Where do you see yourself going? I'd like to continue growing in HR leadership, Priya said carefully. I love the strategic aspects of the work, helping business leaders solve people challenges. Your functional leader has recommended you for promotion to director. How do you feel about that? Priya hesitated. I'm excited about the opportunity. But I've been told that I need to work on my executive presence first. That I'm too quiet in meetings, that I need to be more assertive, that I need to project more confidence. Who told you that? I asked, though I could guess. My skip-level manager. He's been giving me feedback about speaking up more, about being more visible, about fitting in better with senior leadership. I felt a surge of anger, carefully controlled. This was exactly the kind of feedback I had received years ago, the kind that suggests the problem is you rather than outdated expectations about what leadership should look like. Priya, can I ask you something? When you do speak up in meetings, when you share your perspective, is it well-reasoned and valuable? I think so, she said uncertainly. I try to make sure I have evidence to support my points. And how often are your recommendations ultimately adopted? Usually. Most of the time when I suggest something, it ends up being the direction we go. So you have good judgment, you provide valuable input, and your recommendations are generally correct. Would that be fair to say? Yes, I suppose so. Then you don't have an executive presence problem, I said firmly. You have a manager who has outdated ideas about what leadership looks like. There's nothing wrong with being thoughtful, with listening more than you talk, with being evidence-based rather than emphatic. Those are leadership strengths, not weaknesses. Priya looked surprised, then relieved. That's not what I expected you to say. I'm going to tell you something I wish someone had told me years ago, I said. The feedback you're getting about executive presence and assertiveness is often code for, "You don't look and act like what we're used to in leadership." It's rarely about actual capabilities. Don't waste energy trying to be someone you're not. Focus on continuing to do excellent work, on developing your strategic thinking, on building relationships based on delivering value. That's what actually matters. I approved Priya's promotion to director. I also had a direct conversation with her skip-level manager about his feedback, making clear that evaluations needed to be based on results and capabilities, not subjective assessments of presence or fit. That interaction reminded me why this work matters so much. Priya is exactly the kind of talented person who would have been held back under the old system, told she didn't fit the image, encouraged to change herself rather than challenging others to change their expectations. Now she has the opportunity to advance based on her actual capabilities. This is what I've built over the past 7 years. A system where people are evaluated on results rather than image, where diverse leadership styles are valued, where feedback is based on evidence rather than bias. It's not perfect. Bias still creeps in. Old habits die hard. But it's dramatically better than what we had. And it's delivered business results. Our employee engagement is higher. Our retention is better. Our innovation metrics have improved. Diverse teams are outperforming homogeneous ones. The business case for inclusive people management isn't theoretical. It's proven in our data quarter after quarter. Richard Morrison, our CEO, has become one of the strongest advocates for this approach. He regularly talks about how changing our leadership pipeline has strengthened the company. He's even publicly acknowledged that Hartwell's historical approach to talent management was too narrow and that expanding our definition of leadership has been critical to our recent success. Last year, Richard asked me to join him in a presentation to our board of directors about talent strategy. As we prepared, he said something that stuck with me. "Maya, when I first met you during the data vision integration, I almost dismissed you the same way Virginia did. You didn't match my mental image of what a senior HR leader should be. But I'm glad I looked past that initial reaction, because you've been one of the best executives I've worked with. You've taught me that my image of leadership was too narrow." "What changed your mind?" I asked. "Results," he said simply. "You delivered on data vision when Carson couldn't. You provided analysis and recommendations that actually helped me make better decisions. You've built an HR function that's a true business partner." Once I started paying attention to results rather than image, the choice was obvious. That's the lesson, really. Results eventually matter more than image. Not always immediately. Not without struggle. But over time, organizations that prioritize substance over style, that value diverse approaches to leadership, that make decisions based on evidence rather than bias, those organizations win. I've used my position to create opportunities for others who don't fit traditional molds. We've promoted women and people of color to senior roles at rates that would have been unthinkable 7 years ago. We've hired leaders with non-traditional backgrounds. We've created flexible work arrangements that allow people with different life circumstances to succeed. We've built a culture where different leadership styles can thrive. And yes, I've taken satisfaction in approving salaries and promotions for people who once doubted me. Gerald Thompson, the CFO who questioned my presence, reports to a new CFO now, a woman I hired 2 years ago who is brilliant, strategic, and completely unlike the traditional finance executive image. His salary increases have been modest. His career has plateaued. Not because I'm vindictive, but because his results and his leadership approach don't warrant more. The skip-level manager who told Priya she needed more executive presence? He was passed over for a VP role last year. His feedback in the promotion review process noted that while he had strong technical skills, his evaluation of talent was too narrow and his development of diverse leaders was inadequate. He's now working to improve those areas if he wants to advance further. Carson Matthews, the person who was promoted over me because he fit the image? He lasted less than a year at his next company before being let go. He's now a consultant doing short-term projects. His polished presence and prestigious credentials weren't enough to sustain a career when he couldn't deliver substantive results. I don't take personal satisfaction in these outcomes. Well, maybe a little. But more than that, they validate that the old way of evaluating talent was flawed. The people who succeeded under that system often couldn't sustain success when actually evaluated on results. The people who were held back often thrived once given opportunities. Last week, I had coffee with a colleague from my early days at Hartwell, someone who was in that first cohort of HR analysts I joined with 9 years ago. She had left the company years ago, frustrated by limited opportunities for advancement. "I still can't believe you're SVP," she said, shaking her head in amazement. "When we started here, I never imagined someone like us could make it to the executive team." "What do you mean, someone like us?" I asked, though I knew what she meant. "You know, women of color. People who don't fit the Hartwell image. I always assumed the senior roles would go to people who looked and acted like Richard and Virginia and Gerald. That's just how it was." "That's how it was," I agreed. "But it's not how it is anymore. We've changed that. Not completely, not perfectly, but significantly." "Do you ever think about how different your career would have been if Virginia had promoted you when you first applied for director?" she asked. "I've thought about that question often. If Virginia had promoted me 7 years ago, I would have advanced earlier. I would have had a smoother path. I wouldn't have experienced the pain of being told I didn't fit the image. But I also wouldn't have had the same motivation to change systems. I wouldn't have understood as deeply how bias operates and how to counter it. I wouldn't have developed the same commitment to creating opportunities for others. The rejection, as painful as it was, sharpened my purpose and clarified my mission. I think everything happened the way it needed to," I finally said. "The rejection hurt, but it also taught me things I needed to learn. It gave me perspective I wouldn't have had otherwise. It made me a better leader than I would have been if everything had come easily." That's what I've come to believe about that conference room conversation 7 years ago, when Virginia told me I didn't fit the image. It was meant to be a ceiling, a boundary, a definition of my limits. Instead, it became fuel. It crystallized my determination to prove that their image was wrong, that success could look different than they imagined, that leadership capability had nothing to do with matching some narrow template. Now I sit in the office that was once Virginia's, making decisions about promotions and compensation for thousands of people. Every day, I review recommendations, evaluate candidates, approve salaries. And I do it with constant awareness that the person I'm evaluating might be another Maya Patel, someone who doesn't fit the traditional image but who has exactly the capabilities we need. I look for evidence of results, not evidence of presence. I look for strategic thinking, not conformity to expectations. I look for the ability to deliver value, not the ability to look the part. And when I see talented people being held back by outdated definitions of what leadership should look like, I intervene. That's the real power of being the person who approves salaries and promotions. It's not about personal vindication or revenge. It's about making sure the next generation doesn't face the same barriers I faced. It's about ensuring that capability matters more than image, that results matter more than style, that talent is recognized regardless of whether it comes in the expected package. 3 months ago, we had an all-company meeting where Richard announced some leadership changes. Among them was the promotion of Priya Sharma, the young woman I had advocated for, to Vice President of Talent Development. She's now one of the youngest VPs in company history, leading a critical function. After the announcement, several people came up to tell me they were surprised by Priya's promotion. She was so young, so quiet, so unlike traditional VPs. Was I sure she was ready for the role? I smiled and said, "Watch her results over the next year. Then tell me if she was ready." She's been in the role for 3 months now, and she's already making an impact. She's redesigned our leadership development program to focus on actual leadership capabilities rather than executive presence. She's created new pathways for people with different backgrounds to advance. She's building exactly the kind of talent pipeline Hartwell needs for the future. And she's doing it her way. Thoughtful, evidence-based, collaborative, nothing like the traditional image of a VP. She's proving, just as I proved, that leadership looks many different ways. That's my legacy, ultimately. Not the title or the salary or the power to approve compensation. It's the system I've built that allows talented people to advance based on their capabilities, rather than their conformity to outdated images. It's the culture I've helped create where diverse leadership styles can thrive. It's the opportunities I've opened for people who don't fit traditional molds. Virginia once told me I didn't fit the image. She was right. I didn't fit the image. But I didn't need to. The image was the problem, not me. And now I'm the one defining what leadership looks like at Hartwell, ensuring that the image reflects reality rather than limiting possibility. Every time I approve a promotion for someone who doesn't fit the traditional mold, every time I advocate for a candidate whose style is different from what's expected, every time I challenge bias in evaluation processes, I'm proving that Virginia was wrong. Not just about me, but about what leadership requires, about what makes organizations successful, about what we should value in our people. I was denied a promotion because I didn't fit the image. Now I'm the one approving salaries, promotions, and leadership appointments. And I'm using that power to ensure that no talented person will ever again be told that not fitting the image is what holds them back. That's not revenge. That's revolution. And it's the most satisfying work I've ever done. My name is Maya Patel. I was told I didn't fit the image for senior leadership. Now I'm the Senior Vice President of Human Resources, overseeing people decisions for a 15,000-person organization. Every significant salary, every important promotion, every key appointment crosses my desk for approval. And every single one of those decisions is made based on capability, results, and potential, not on whether someone fits an outdated image of what leadership should look like. That's what real power looks like. Not the power to exclude, but the power to include. Not the power to perpetuate bias, but the power to eliminate it. Not the power to maintain old systems, but the power to build new ones. Virginia thought she was teaching me my place when she told me I didn't fit the image. Instead, she taught me my purpose: to change the image, to expand the definition, to create a system where talent matters more than type, where substance matters more than style, where everyone has the opportunity to lead in their own way. I didn't fit their image. And that turned out to be my greatest advantage, because it meant I couldn't be satisfied with their system. I had to build a better one. And now that better system is in place, creating opportunities for countless people who also don't fit the traditional image but who have exactly what it takes to lead, to succeed, to transform organizations and drive results. That's the journey from being denied a promotion for not fitting the image to being the one who approves salaries. It's a journey that required resilience, persistence, excellence, and the courage to be yourself in an environment that wanted you to be someone else. It was worth every difficult moment. And I would do it all again, because the system I've built is creating opportunities for people who deserve them, driving business results that prove inclusive leadership works, and ensuring that the next generation won't face the same barriers I faced. The image has changed. And I'm proud to have been the one who changed it.